JP Chadwick with Max Chadwick of Pro Football Focus and the co-host of the PFF College Football Show. Hey, the offseason is in full go right now, Max. It's good to talk with you, and we're a few weeks now out of the NFL draft. The offseason programs here. The rookies are on the field with the veterans, and, hey, this is a good time to kind of reflect a little bit on what the Jaguars might have added here. First off, thanks for coming on. How's it going this offseason for you?
It's been great, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to Jacksonville Jaguars with you. And yeah, it's been a weird time right now. With no football going on. We're post NFL draft, so it's kind of like a summer vacation for most of us right now. But still a lot of content coming out around college football, around the NFL at PFF, and yeah, it's kind of a little more relaxed time right now, but still a lot of stuff coming out too. So
let's start in the first round. I mean, the Jaguars have had some changes on the offensive side. A couple of weapons are gone. Obviously, Calvin Ridley is gone. Zay Jones, after the draft, was gone because the Jaguars picked up Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver from LSU. We've heard all about his speed. We've heard all about his smarts as well. He was in the building the day after the first round, and I think that's really what stood out about him. So in your perspective, what stood out about Brian Thomas Jr.?
Yeah, I think he's one of the best vertical threats in this class, honestly. He had the highest deep receiving grade in the country this year, 99.9 grade. Hard to get too much better than that on a scale of 1 to 100, obviously. He had 12 touchdowns on deep throws as well, 20-plus yard throws, and also led the country. He had the most catches on deep throws. He had the most receiving yards on deep throws. He is a vertical threat. And I think that's exactly what the Jacksonville Jaguars needed on offense, was to get a vertical threat on offense with Trevor Lawrence there, who, for better or for worse, loves to attack down the field. So they needed a receiver that can stretch the field vertically, and I think Brian Thomas Jr. can do exactly that. So that's kind of what they were missing in that offense, in my opinion, and that's exactly the kind of player that Brian Thomas Jr. is. So I'm really excited to see the fit with him and Trevor Lawrence. I think those two are going to work really well together.
Yeah, and obviously Thomas last year in Baton Rouge put up the most touchdowns in all of FBS, and in an offense that has some weapons over the years. They've produced some wide receivers out of that place. And if you have that vertical speed, then the rest of it can come at some point. I think that's the idea for the Jaguars coaching staff, is to maybe develop some more things in his game as that goes along. But when you start with the speed and the smarts, that's a good start.
Yeah, it's a really good start, honestly. And not only that, for the size, too.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a bigger receiver as well, got great speed, ran like a 4.3 in the 40-yard dash. And yeah, like I said, I mean, he was in that offense with Jaden Daniels, who was also a great running threat. So it wasn't like Jaden Daniels was passing every time. And also the best receiver in college football this past year, Malik Neighbors. And yet Brian Thomas Jr. still had the most receiving touchdowns as well. So even though he was the number 2 receiver on an LSU team, he still was extremely productive and still was one of the most productive receivers in college football, even as the number 2 receiver. So that's why he ended up being a first-round pick as well. So he's got great size, great speed, and an excellent production this past season as well. I really do. I'm a big fan of that pick for Jacksonville at number 23 overall.
That tells you how difficult the final year of the SEC West was as well. If they're losing a handful of games with that kind of offense, that's
right.
Week to week in the SEC. Good luck. Staying in Baton Rouge, the Jaguars in the second round go to the defensive line and get tackle Mason Smith. All right, what stands out about him besides his impressive size? And, he's a guy that can jump in that rotation, I think, right away.
Yeah, listen, Trent Baalke has a type, right? And it's why you saw Trayvon Walker go number 1 overall when a lot of people, including myself, thought Aiden Hutchinson probably should have been the number 1 overall pick. He clearly values the potential of a player more than what he is right now. And I think that's exactly the way to describe Mason Smith, who is a, like you said, size, speed freak. He got hurt last year, so he missed basically all of the season besides like a few snaps. He got hurt in the season opener. This past season, he was solid, but I wouldn't say he was a top 50 caliber player. Like for me, I probably would have spent more of maybe a day 3 pick on him, like a 4th round pick. So getting him in the second round, I think was a little bit of a reach, but obviously Trent Baalke is a type. Like I said, with Trayvon Walker there, they obviously value athleticism. You saw Brian Thomas Jr. be the first round pick, who was kind of a lot of potential as well. Mason Smith has a lot of projection, but he obviously has a high ceiling with how good his traits are. It's just that we haven't seen the production to match those traits just yet for a number of reasons, with the injuries, and just he hasn't really developed too much at LSU either. So he's definitely a developmental project for Jacksonville, and I don't love taking a project like that at number 48 overall, but there's no denying he has a high ceiling, and I think he could be a big-time contributor for Jacksonville if he develops like hopefully Trayvon Walker will too.
And they've got, some veteran players on the interior that they are expecting to play a lot of time there. Obviously, Eric Armstead brought in free agency this offseason. Roy Robertson-Harris, a guy who has been around now for a few years in Jacksonville, so that could give him a little bit of time to develop. Moving on to round number 3, Max Chadwick with us from Pro Football Focus. Jarian Jones, the cornerback from Florida State. And, this is a defense that has a new coordinator, and they've got some changes in the secondary. A couple of veteran players are out, so they've had to make some changes here. They did it in free agency. They brought in a couple of veteran players, but then they go to the draft. And tell us about Jones. Where can he play right away?
I think he's more of a slot defender, honestly. I don't think he's got the long speed to truly be an outside corner, but he's got the quickness to excel in the slot, and he's also a really, really good tackler. Really good run defender as well, which, again, translates more to being a slot corner than an outside corner. He had a 90.1 grade this past year as 5th best among all corners in the country. Only zero touchdowns allowed on 458 coverage snaps since 2022. So I like Jarian Jones a lot. I thought Florida State's defense was extremely underrated last year, especially their secondary. I thought they were one of the best secondaries in the country between Renardo Green, Jarian Jones, and Fentrell Cypress, who's going back to school as well. I really like Jarian Jones a lot, but I think I wouldn't expect him to be an outside corner for Jacksonville. I think he's probably more of a nickel corner in the NFL.
And then moving on to the 4th round, Jaguars had a couple of picks in the 4th. Javon Foster, tackle out of Missouri. Jordan Jefferson, defensive tackle out of LSU, more of a nose tackle type. Let's start with Foster. The Jaguars at the tackle position have Cam Robinson, who's going into a contract year, who is on a big money contract. Walker Little, who is the swing tackle, who was a second-round pick a few years ago and hasn't been able to crack the lineup consistently. And then Anton Harrison, of course, a first-round draft pick last year. So where does Foster fit into the equation, and what can he bring when he's out there?
I think Javon Foster is more likely a swing tackle right now. I don't expect him to be in the starting lineup right now. I will say, though, I thought this guy was one of the most underrated prospects in the NFL draft, and I'm a big fan of the Jacksonville Jaguars selecting him in the 4th round. Now, like you said, it is a kind of a crowded tackle room that they have right now, but there's no denying Javon Foster in the SEC over the last 3 years has been extremely productive as Missouri's starting left tackle. In fact, he had 80-plus grades in every single year of the last 3 seasons when he's been a starter. So he has really, really been an impressive player. There's 11 Power 5 tackles since 2021 that's had 80-plus grades both as a pass blocker and as a run blocker. Javon Foster is one of them, and here's 7 other of them. Javon Foster, Joe Alt, Talisa Falanga, Charles Cross, Peter Skoronski, Evan Neal, DeJuan Jones. I mean, those are all starting NFL offensive linemen right now, and a lot of them were first-round picks as well. So Javon Foster's not an elite athlete, doesn't have great bend, doesn't have great flexibility, but I do think he's been a really productive player. And I think down the line, if you're telling me this guy's a starting tackle down the line in the NFL, I wouldn't be too shocked, honestly. So I was a huge fan of Javon Foster coming out. I even probably would have taken him maybe even in the 3rd round of the draft. So Jacksonville getting him in the 4th round, that was a really good steal. And, I'm a huge fan of his game, and we'll see how he can do in the NFL. But if he's anything like he was in college, he could be a very, very productive player.
And consistently available as well. He was out there a lot, played a lot of consecutive games at Missouri. Jordan Jefferson, big body, nose tackle. And I loved his interview. It was on the porch after the draft. He was on his front porch. He had like a shirtless shirt, a T-shirt, or sleeveless T-shirt on, wraparound sunglasses. He was just kind of like that gritty nose tackle type, and you need those guys on your D-line.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's the first time, I think I saw a stat, it was the first time ever that one school took 3 players from the same, or one team, took 3 players from the same school. And Jordan Jefferson was the 3rd LSU Tiger that Trent Baalke and the Jacksonville Jaguars selected here. A lot like Mason Smith in some ways, where he's kind of still a raw player that needs to develop a little bit, but there's no denying he's got great tools. I mean, he tested out as a well above average athlete. He had 34 bench press reps, which were in the 94th percentile for defensive tackles, even with longer arms, too. Usually when you have a lot of bench press reps, as a guy with shorter arms, because obviously it's easier to get it up when you have shorter arms. When you have long arms like Jordan Jefferson, it's harder to put up that many reps, and yet that just shows how strong of a player he is. He's able to stack and shed blockers in the run game really well. He holds up really well against double teams. Good burst off the ball, even though he's not covering a lot of ground. I think he's a solid athlete overall. Now, the problem with him is that he's just not much of a pass rusher right now. He has a 61 grade in pass rushing over this past season. He's kind of still developing technically, but I think as a run defender, he's a very strong player, will hold up against double teams, can stack and shed blockers. He's got good burst as well. He's a good athlete. Just got to get some refinement, I think, in his game, especially as a pass rusher, before he could be a full-time starter for a team. But if you're asking him just to be a guy who could eat up double teams and stack and shed in the run game on first and second down, that's something I think he could do pretty quickly. So that's probably what Jacksonville has in mind for him right now, and I think that's something he should be able to do pretty quickly in his rookie year.
Max Chadwick, Pro Football Focus analyst and the co-host of the PFF College Football Show, joining us. All right, we'll group the last 4 draft picks in kind of the same window here. DeAndre Prince from Ole Miss, a cornerback in the 5th round. Keelan Robinson, Texas running back and kick returner in the 5th round. Cam Little, the 20-year-old kicker out of Arkansas in the 6th round. And Miles Cole, defensive end, Texas Tech. Obviously, these a lot of times will be special teams contributors and maybe develop. They're a lot of times fighting to make the roster in the later rounds, especially in the 7th round. Cam Little should be here as the kicker. Robinson might have a chance as a kick returner. But of those 3 position players, we'll leave the kicker out of it, who could make the most impact early? Who has the better chance to make this team?
Yeah, good question. I think it's kind of a cop-out answer considering he was the highest drafted of all of them. Yeah. But I think DeAndre Prince is an interesting guy. I mean, he has 70-plus grades in all 3 years as a starter at Ole Miss. He's really good in zone coverage, really, really good run defender as well. He ran a 4.38 40-yard dash. The problem with him and why he went a little bit lower in the draft, you hear all those stats and like, whoa, how did this guy end up falling in the 5th round? He's only 184 pounds at 6 feet tall, and he's a guy that really loves to play in press coverage. That's just not really something that can happen in the NFL if you're only 184 pounds. Like you could get bodied by bigger receivers in the NFL at that size. So he's got to get stronger if he wants to become more of a press corner. But even at 184 pounds, like I said, I mean, he was holding up well in press coverage, and he was a great run defender too. Usually those smaller corners like that, that's where you see them get tossed around a little bit in the run game and then in press coverage. DeAndre Prince plays bigger than what he's listed at, honestly. So I think he could be a really good special teams contributor for them. And I think he could be a guy that needs to add just some strength, but he could be a good press corner in the league. So like I said, special teams is probably how he's going to be a guy that's going to be used early on in his career. But if he adds some weight and adds some strength, he could contribute more as a defensive player, maybe as a rotational defensive back for Jacksonville. Don't know if he'll ever be a full-time starter for them, but I think as a rotational guy, he could be a guy in that rotation for sure. So I like DeAndre Prince a lot, and I think he's an interesting guy in that secondary. Again, I won't expect him to make too much of an impact on the defense immediately, but as a special teams player, I think there's definitely a role for him on that special teams because of his mentality, honestly. I think his mentality in the run game, his mentality in press coverage, that's something that could really translate well to special teams because that's really special teams is all about mentality almost. So you got to go out there and give it your all on every play, and I think DeAndre Prince will probably be able to do that for Jacksonville.
Max Chadwick, Pro Football Focus, going through the Jaguars draft picks. Big picture kind of college football thought here going into 2024. A lot of changes, obviously, in conference realignment. There will be so many different matchups this year that on paper you're like, wait a minute, this is a bowl game. No. These are all conference games now. That's changed a lot. But the way players can move around and there's no penalty for transfers and all that is a conversation piece also. But in terms of the NFL game and developing players, which is in theory not college's true goal, they're there to win on campus, and then if they develop, in most instances, that's fine. Have you seen a trend lately more towards a certain area of football that guys develop better and adapt better to the NFL? Like, for example, it can be tough to get offensive linemen because of the way offenses are run in college football. Is this wide receiver heavy? Are we going to see that in the years ahead?
Yeah, I think the receiver talent is just getting better and better, and you saw it this past year. I mean, there were a ton of receivers that went in the first round, and a ton of receivers that went on day 2 as well. I don't think it'll ever be changing anytime soon. It's becoming more of a pass-happy game, and you got to get players that affect the passing game as much as possible, which is why wide receiver has probably become the second most valuable position in the NFL outside of quarterback, honestly. So I think that's not changing anytime soon. Offensive line, you're right. That is a problem with today's day and age is that guys come into the NFL and they're just not really that ready because they don't really run pro-style offenses in college. And, in those spread games they run, in the RPO-heavy games, they're just not really used to, the pro-style offenses in the NFL. So there is a major development curve for them when they come into the NFL. But in terms of the guys you're going to see more and more just instant impact guys immediately, I think wide receiver is probably the position to bank on the most, because, there's just so many talented players coming into that position. And a lot of teams are putting their most athletic players at wide receiver right now. So, yeah, I think wide receiver, it's been that trend for the last few years, and that trend is not changing anytime soon, in my opinion. So, yeah, wide receiver is definitely the position that's probably going to be the biggest one for college to the NFL for a foreseeable future.
And finally, who's the number one prospect in college football next year overall?
Oh, great question. Okay, I think James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee is number one on PFF's big board right now. He's an edge defender from Tennessee. I think there's a really good chance we get a non-quarterback that goes number one next year. I think the quarterback class is a little bit weaker at the top, and I think we could get a guy that like James Pierce Jr. that can go number one. He's a freak athlete, one of the best pass rushers in college football. As a true sophomore this past season in the SEC, the thing with him, which is kind of enticing, is that he was a really good pass rusher without any pass rushing moves, really. He was winning purely off athleticism, and yet he was still just as effective as almost anyone else in the country. So this guy developed some moves. He could be damn near unblockable, honestly. And then as a run defender, there's still some work to do. He's obviously a little bit skinnier, so he's got to add some strength in the run game. But James Pierce Jr., that's probably the one guy I would say right now. If there's a non-quarterback that's going to go number one overall next year, it might be James Pierce Jr., or it might be like an alien like Travis Hunter who could play both ways. That's another guy to look out for. And Mason Graham from Michigan, I'd be remiss if I don't mention him. The defensive tackle at Michigan, he's going to be an absolutely unbelievable defensive tackle prospect, probably one of the best ones we've seen in recent memory, in my opinion. So those are the three players I think I would watch out for right now as like the top guys to watch out next year.
He's about the only guy left in Ann Arbor, I think, after the draft of this year.
Yeah.
See how they regroup, and they probably will. Max Chadwick, Pro Football Focus. Great to visit with you. Thank you for the insight. Good luck to you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.